Okay. Hi, Rachel. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Doing great. Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. Nice to see
My
you. Nice
pleasure.
to have you with us. So, you have written a book called Beyond Madness: The Pain and Possibilities of Serious Mental Illness. Before we get to your book, though, you are a PhD. What is your area of expertise?
I'm a gerontologist. I study successful aging.
Successful aging.
Mhm.
Okay. I might need some advice on that one. I'm starting to age, and I don't know how successful it's been. What do you mean by successful aging? Like aging and maintaining your health and your well-being, all of that?
Well, actually, I spent my career studying that, and we could spend hours talking about that. But basically, I see successful aging as a combination of good physical health, but also feeling like you're aging successfully, reporting that you feel like you're aging well. There's a subjective component to successful aging and an objective component to it.
I don't want to dwell on this, but it's interesting for me because although I don't move as quickly as I used to, I feel so much more comfortable than I did when I was 20. I don't have
Hmm.
that gnawing desire to find myself entertainment. I'm more interested in just being comfortable and being content with whatever it is that I'm doing in the moment. Where when I was
Hmm.
young, I never felt that. Is that
Hmm.
successful aging? Is that the mark of a
It might
successful
be.
aging?
It might be.
Okay.
Something to think about. Yep.
Okay. So your book, Beyond Madness, is this your first book, or have you written other books, published other books?
It is not my first book. I actually published a memoir in 2014 called Surrounded by Madness. And in that book, I told my story. And my story, in terms of mental illness, my mother suffered from what used to be called manic depression, now is called bipolar disorder. And my adopted daughter suffers from bipolar disorder. And I'm a psychologist. So in that memoir, described mental illness and my perspective. Talked about my experiences with mental illness as a child, as a professional, and as a parent.
Okay, so this book is this a continuation of that, or
No, it is not.
okay?
This book, in this book, so what happened, I wrote my memoir and I went on the speaking circuit and I talked to social workers in training and psychologists and medical doctors. And I would tell my story and we would talk, the kids would listen to that and then we would open it up for discussion. And the big question was, what can we, these professionals that we're training to be professionals, what can we do to make life better for people with serious mental illness? And I had enough of those conversations to realize that there was another book that I needed to write, and that is what Beyond Madness is. So, in Beyond Madness, the premise of Beyond Madness is while there's a lot we do not know about serious mental illnesses, illnesses like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, major depression, there's a lot we do know. And sadly, that information is not getting to the people who need it. Who are those people? The families, the teachers, the police, the clergy, people who know that there's a problem and they don't know what to do.
I know over the last century we've come a long way in mental health treatment and the way it's approached and the way it is viewed by the psychiatric community. We're not doing lobotomies and electroshock therapies anymore. However,
We are doing shock therapy, and it's actually one of the most effective treatments for depression.
in the same manner that they used to do it.
It's a little more humane, but it's
Uh,
basically a shock therapy,
okay,
electroshock.
well,
Yes.
I didn't
Yeah.
know that. I thought they got rid of that for because it was cruel and unusual.
It's actually very effective for some treatment resistant people with depression.
Okay, all right. Well, good to know. I learned something.
Yeah. Yeah.
However, my point here it was that there's still a lot we don't know.
Yes.
And there are people who I've spoken to on the show who cannot take medication. They were prescribed some sort of, what do they call it, psychotropic?
Psychotropic. Uh huh.
Psychotropic. And they couldn't take it because they were creative artists and they found that when they took the medication, it destroyed their ability to create. It just dulled that side of the brain. So they had to find other treatment for them. So there's still kind of a lot we don't know. The medications that have been given out, they're not a one-size-fits-all, are they?
No, they're not. The medications are not at all one size fits all. And the medications, I do want to comment on the relationship between the medications and creativity. It's one of the issues that I talk about, that I studied a lot to work and discuss in the book. There is a link between mental illness and creativity, but it's not as simple as most people think it is. For the most part, many of the medications can dull some creativity. But if somebody is so wildly psychotic, there's no way they can be creative. So it's more of a curvilinear, probably, relationship between creativity and mental illness. But again, it's a really complex issue that I just want to be really careful to say that medications don't work for everybody. They work for some people. They work for some symptoms. The medications are primarily effective if we think about schizophrenia. The medications, schizophrenia is a combination of what's called positive symptoms. Not that they're good, but positive symptoms are things like delusions and hallucinations. And negative symptoms. Negative symptoms are things like a flat affect, cognitive problems. The medications work to dull the positive symptoms. So the medications help to relieve the hallucinations and the delusions, right? But they really don't touch the affective symptoms, nor do they touch the cognitive problems. So for those, we need other kinds of therapies. We talked a little bit about depression, you and I, about electroshock. But there are so many medications. One of the big challenges that people with these serious mental illnesses have is finding the right medication at the right dose. And of course, over time that can change. So sadly, I think about each individual person with illness as a chemistry experiment. Because what works for one person isn't necessarily going to work for another person. There's some new research out that shows that there's perhaps a genetic link between if we understand more about the genetics of a person's body, that we can better prescribe depression medications.
You mentioned genetic link. Do you think that mental illness, it can be hereditary?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No doubt. Yeah, no doubt. It's both. It's both hereditary. There is a genetic component. If you look at family histories, there's a link. People who have schizophrenia in their family, it's in multiple people. Same with bipolar disorder, in multiple people. On the other hand, there are some people. Not everybody with a parent with bipolar disorder is going to get bipolar disorder. So it's really, if I had to, kind of come up with one word that describes mental illness, it's complicated. It's just really complicated. And I think too often we try to simplify things, but there's so much we don't know.
How are we as a society viewing mental illness now? Better than we used to?
No, not really.
Not really.
If you look at some of the literature about stigma, so we asked people in the 50s, they did studies where they asked people, how likely would you be to want to have a family member marry somebody with schizophrenia? Or how likely would you want to be to work with somebody with schizophrenia? And the patterns of responses back in the 50s are very similar to the patterns of responses now. So we're not doing so much better. Sadly, I don't think we are. It's stigma is alive and well. In my own personal experience, my mother was ill in the 60s, the 1960s, and the rest of the family kept her illness a secret. And when my daughter became ill in the 2000s, the early 2000s, my husband and I kept her illness a secret. So, I think stigma, unfortunately, is alive and well. And my hypothesis is that it's because so many people don't talk about it. We keep secrets. I was a primo secret keeper for 50 years. And I really do think if I could go back and, relive things, I would do things very differently. I think that on a personal level, keeping secrets harms us because it robs us of the natural support system that we all have. If you don't tell people what's going on, they can't support you. And that's what I did, right? I didn't tell my brothers. I didn't tell my friends, many of whom are psychologists, by the way. And these people could have helped me. And they would have been delighted to help me. In fact, when I finally kind of came out and wrote my memoir and was talking about it in sort of 2014, so many people started to tell me their stories that I had no idea about either. So we were keeping secrets from each other. Like, how ridiculous is that, right?
We just got a couple of minutes left. I wanted to ask you about mental institutions. A lot of them have been closed. I know in the early 1980s, a lot of them got shut down because of I believe because of the availability of a lot of the new drugs that we were talking about. And people seemed to get better. They felt that they didn't need the institutions. I know there was government cutbacks during the Reagan days. I've heard other people now saying that that was not necessarily the best idea, that even though people can feel better on medication, they need supervision in order to make sure that they continue on their medication. Because if they go off the medication, they often relapse worse than where they started. Do you think we need to revive mental institutions in a modern version? I don't mean the old Kirkbride buildings.
Yeah, so again, I think this is a complicated issue. I think we need a full continuum of care. Right now we have nothing. We have terrible care. I think if you go back and really study these institutions originally, some of them were amazing, wonderful places. They were in bucolic, beautiful settings. They were in farms. Yeah. They were very positive, had very positive effects on some people. I think that there are some times when some people need to be in a hospital setting. Not all the time, but just to stabilize people. One of the big problems we have now is that we don't keep people in hospitals long enough to see whether their medications work. It takes time to titrate the medications into a person and to see, to get the dosage right. We don't do that anymore. So on the other hand, many of the institutions were hellholes. They were horrible places where staff were abusing patients. So, we have to be really careful what we talk about when we talk about the institutions, because the institutions had interesting lives of their own over the course of history. Yeah, but I do think that there's a need for a full continuum of care where you have the ability to protect a person in an institution when they need that. But then we need to phase them back into society, into their families, and it's a sort of two-way street. We need to be able to provide the kind of care that people need, which really is a full continuum of care.
Right, which may not necessarily need to be in an institutional environment. It could be home care, but but they need to be supervised on some kind of level. Some people do.
Well, and it's really very difficult. How do you supervise an adult? It's very difficult, and we get into the rights of people to autonomy and making decisions, and again, it's very, very complicated. So I don't think that we can. And again, what works for one person at one point in their life might not work for that same person at a different time.
Not a one size fits all, that's for sure.
Not at all. Not at all.
Okay, well, we do have to wind this down. Thank you so much for coming on. Do you have a website you want to give out?
RachelPruchno.net, and the book Beyond Madness, The Pain and Possibilities of Serious Mental Illness is on sale. The Kindle version and Amazon, Barnes & Noble for $1.99 through the end of July.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. This was quite enlightening, and thank you for enlightening me on electroshock, because I thought that was long gone. And best of luck with the book.